parable of the prodigal son is one of the better-known stories Jesus told, but it's important that we're careful not to let our familiarity cause us to overlook some of the amazing truths found in this story. Today on Truth for Life, Alistair Begg helps us see this parable with fresh eyes as he continues his message titled Evangelistic Preaching.
Luke chapter 15 and verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." One of the salutary features of growing old, I think, or older at least, is that you hear yourself sounding dreadfully like your parents, and that the cliches that once rang in your ears now flow from your lips. I was in a home earlier in the week, and I noted that the structure of this newly built home had some lovely stonework in the entryway. And the little boy of the home had a head that was just at the perfect height for the stone balustrades that had been constructed in the front hallway. And I caught myself saying, "Oh, you're going to have to be careful with this stonework, because that little boy's head is just..." And just as I heard myself saying it, I said, oh dear, do I sound like my father? Why am I so concerned about the little boy's head and the stonework? Well, it's a feature of age. How many times as a child were we told by our parents, "Walk, don't run"? It was apparently in order to ensure our safety, in certain circumstances to ensure a measure of decorum, and almost inevitably the directive was given at the most awkward and inappropriate time. The arrival of your grandmother, and you wanted to run to her, and you were told, "Walk, don't run." Or the emergence of a puppy out of a newsagent shop, and off you go. But it's walk, don't run. And suddenly you're older, and you're with your father at the railway station, and you're a little late for the train, and your father sets off, and you say to him, "Now, Dad, walk, don't run. The train will wait for us. Just walk. There's no need to run. There's no need for haste." And your father turns and says, "Well, you may think that, but I think there is need for haste, and I think we both need to run." Well, you say it's funny you should say that, because that's how I used to feel when I was small, and you said, "Walk, don't run," and I couldn't run, and now I'm telling you, and you... But the fact of the matter is, this directive, walk, don't run, has within it the almost inevitability of the fact that there are times in life when all that the individual can do is run. There are circumstances that confront us that inevitably, if you like, break the bounds of propriety and send somebody off in a run when decorum or safety would be marked by walking. I mention that because we have such a scene in the story that is recorded for us here in Luke 15. We have somebody running in a context when walking would seem to be more appropriate. Running in such a way as to cause onlookers to say, "What's up with this fellow?" Tucking his long flowing robes, as we thought about earlier in our conference, into his belt and heading off down the road. So that one of his neighbors says to someone over the garden fence, "Was that Mr. Benjamin I just saw running down the street?" "Yes," says his friend, "I think it was. And quite undignified, I must say. Surprising. What would have made him run like that?" What indeed? Now, when I tell you that the story that Jesus provides for us here is a story in which the Father represents God, you may have occasion then to think about God in a way in which you have never, ever thought about Him. The idea of a running God. The idea of a God who runs. What would ever make God do such a thing? Well, we'll come to that, but first we need to look at the story. So let's just look at it. And I say look at it. Of course, we hear it, we read it, we listen to it, but it really is a wonderful series of pictures. It would make a terrific home video, wouldn't it? And on our digital cameras, there are a number of snapshots that we would love to be able to provide up on a screen. Perhaps if we were making snapshots, the opening picture that we would want to make sure we had would be in verses 1 and 2, because there Luke, who writes this gospel, sets the scene for us. And he provides there a group context where there are a variety of individuals, essentially saints and sinners, or at least those who regarded themselves as saints and those who knew themselves definitely to be sinners. Jesus, Luke tells us, had on a previous occasion caused quite a commotion because he had chosen to eat dinner at the home of his latest disciple. And back in chapter 5, after Levi had left everything to follow Jesus, he had a great party at his house, a wonderful banquet, and he brought his friends in. Well, of course, his friends were the tax collectors just like himself. His friends were the sinners. His friends were the people he used to play sport with and hang around with at the end of the day. His friends were his friends. And so he said, "I have met this Jesus, and I'd love for you to meet him too. And why don't you come over to our home for supper at 7 o'clock on Thursday, and I'll introduce you to him." Well, of course, the religious folks got wind of this. They were trying to understand who this Jesus of Nazareth was. And when they discovered that he was acting in this way, they said, "This is completely incongruous. If this man was really interested in being a religious figure, if he really was the Messiah of God, as he seems to be suggesting, then presumably he would be around with the saints. He would be with us. He would be at our Bible conference, and he would be reading the Scriptures, not going over to some tax collector's house for a party on a Thursday night." There's great commotion. And Jesus on that occasion, in responding to the question that was asked, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus had said, "It's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." Of course, that makes perfect sense. It's really not wise, or it's not necessary to go to the doctor if you're perfectly healthy. But if something happens, something emerges, a lump, a feeling, a sensation, the swelling of the tonsils, then you go along. And Jesus uses that picture and he says, "I actually haven't come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And there was a commotion. And that notion has continued as Jesus has followed his path towards Jerusalem. And here it is in Luke 15, we discover that the Pharisees are now muttering away, similar to what was going on in chapter 5, and their concern was the same concern. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Well, what was bad news to the supposed saints was good news to the sinners. The Pharisees were enraged by what Jesus did, and these tax collectors and sinners were intrigued by what Jesus did. And it's in that context that Jesus tells these stories, 3 in a row, and the first concerning the lost sheep, and then concerning a lost coin. But all we'll focus on now is this third story concerning a lost son. It's a story that crosses barriers of time and race. It's a story with which most people can identify. It's actually the kind of story that you'll find today in the local newspaper, no matter what city or town you may find yourself in. It's a story of broken relationships. It's a story of the kind of disgruntlement that easily settles in a family. It's a story of rebellious children. And it's the story of the estrangement that emerges as a result of bad choices. In the passage that we read, we dealt only with the first of 2 sons. There is more to this that we may come to on another occasion. The second son is actually estranged from his father just as much as the first. But the first one is more obviously estranged. Now, I should tell you that Jesus is pointing out to his listeners here that they will actually see themselves, if they're honest, in one of these 2 sons. That if they listen carefully to what he's saying, if they observe the description that he provides of both of these individuals, then they will actually see themselves as if they were looking in a mirror. They will see themselves separated from God. Perhaps obviously and defiantly, like the first son. Perhaps secretly, quietly, coldly, like the second son. But they will see themselves. And if you're here today, wondering about God and who he is and what he's done and what he's said, if you look carefully, you will see your face in this too. Now, rather than dwell on the details, which in stories of this kind, namely parables, are usually not to be emphasized, we're going to provide just a series of snapshots. If you look at the text, I think you'll find them. I may identify them in a slightly different way, but certainly these issues are there. The first picture that I would want to put up on the screen is a picture of an empty bedroom. An empty bedroom. Perhaps a couple of posters left on the wall, maybe sandals lying under the bed, an old pair of trainers, but by and large the bedroom absolutely cleared. Well, it's the bedroom of the son. We're told in verse 13 that this younger son had got together all he had. He had packed it up. He had spent time making sure that all of his possessions, by and large, were in his custody, so that when he left without any prospect of return. He left with a resolve never to return. And the empty bedroom was a signal to the family that he had left behind that he was clearly gone. He'd asked his father in this story for whatever was due to him. He was really quite arrogant and presumptuous. It wasn't normal to do such a thing. Usually this would only come his way once his father had died. And in one sense what he was saying was, I wish you were dead. I wish you were dead, and then I'd have what I want. But since you're not, will you give it to me now? Because I want to leave. And there his empty bedroom sits, as a testimony to the fact that he has turned his back on his father. In my files, I have a poem that someone sent to me years ago concerning the prodigal son. And it opens like this. The story begins with a boy gone bad. Faces in the audience light up. The boy takes full advantage of his father, an ancient, kindly man. He wants the inheritance. Everything. Faces grimace. An upstart, someone says. horsewhip him, teach him some manners. Some young men smile, but they all wait, eyes fixed on the face of Jesus. The father lets him go after giving everything, the whole inheritance, the gold, the silver, the favorite horse, the treasured cloak, the ring. Faces show surprise. This father's a fool, someone whispers. The son's a cheat. But they bend forward to listen. Second picture is not now an empty bedroom, but a lonely bedsit. A lonely bedsit. The kind of place that a young man would go and find himself in a city. Perhaps a rented accommodation, more likely than not. Because that's essentially the picture that we have in verse 14. Contemporaneously expressed, albeit, but nevertheless, there it is. After he had spent everything. Verse 13, he had squandered his wealth. He had pushed the limits in his wild living. And if we could have had just a snapshot of the place, I don't think it would have looked very nice. I don't think it would have been color coordinated. I don't think it would have been expressive anything else, other than anything else than profligacy. Just the excess, the expenditure of resources, the profligate use of time and talent and money and that which his father had given him, and the obvious continual expenditure of it, leading him eventually to the place where he was almost in a circumstance that was similar to the one that he had left behind. An empty bedroom, and now a lonely bedsit. Now, we ought not to think of this young man as being unique. We ought not to think of this individual as somehow being lost in a story in Luke 15. This young man is present in our lives routinely. Contemporary poetry and songs express the kind of emptiness and loneliness that is marked in the life of such an individual. Years ago, Paul Simon writes, "Up a narrow flight of stairs to a narrow little room, as I lie upon my bed in the early evening gloom, and impaled upon my wall, my eyes can dimly see the riddle of my life and the puzzle that is me." Can you imagine this young fellow dragging himself up the stairs at the end of a night now? Where will he be next? Well, the third picture is even worse. It's a pigsty, isn't it? From an empty bedroom to a lonely bedsit to a dreadful place. We had a piggery near my home in Glasgow. I was thinking of it just this morning. In fact, I can't imagine why it was there. It was up the side of a railway line in suburban Glasgow. And we used to go there to look at the pigs. But we didn't stay very long because it wasn't pleasant. I remember we remarked on various things. I think we threw things at the pigs, clods of things, and as boys would, and then hastened off before anyone came to chase us. But if anyone had said, how about maybe we could go back tomorrow and have a little picnic there? Maybe we sit down amongst them and share our food with them. We said, you've lost your mind, haven't you? Well, and of course we would. Well, fortunately, this young man had not lost his mind, we're about to see, but he had lost everything else. He began to be in need, it says in verse 14. It's a kind of pregnant statement. It's almost litotes. It doesn't cover everything. He goes to get a job, hires himself out to a citizen of the country, is given the responsibility of feeding pigs. Listen to my poem again. He spends it all on prostitutes, wine, gambling, the best hotels, loose living. An old man looks down at his friends and winks. He should have invested it, he said. That's the wise way. But this one's a fool, another says. And heads nod in agreement. Soon the boy hits bottom, nothing left. He ends up slopping pigs. Faces flinch, stunned. But some smile. He got what he deserved. An old man says, this is a good story. When he'd left his home, confident in his ability to go it alone, presumably with all of his money in his pocket or secured in some way, with a spring in his step, He could surely never have imagined that he would end up in this situation. Look at him there in your mind's eye as he's described for us. Jesus says he went and did this. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. And tragically, no one gave him anything. Look at him, shoeless and ragged and drawn and hungry and frankly humiliated. He would have been so embarrassed if anyone from his community could ever have come around and seen him there. After all, look what he had left behind, and look at what he thought he was going to, and look at where he had now found himself. He'd gone off, if you like, searching for it all, down the road to freedom, down the road to liberation, down the road to opportunity. And here he is in this most helpless and humiliated condition. You remember Paul Simon again in America? Kathy, I'm lost, I said, though I knew she was sleeping. I'm empty and aching, and I don't know why. Counting the cars on the New Jersey Turnpike, we've all gone in search of America, the dream, the fulfillment, the opportunity. It is born into the consciousness of many a young man and many an individual who has said to themselves, if I could be free of these restraints, if I could be out from underneath this burden, then and in that circumstance, I will find what life is all about. That was largely this man's endeavor. And look at where he ends.
We end today with a bit of a cliffhanger. You're listening to Alistair Begg, and this is Truth for Life. We'll hear the conclusion of today's message tomorrow, so be sure to join us then. Today's teaching is part of a series called The Pastor's Study, in honor of Pastor Appreciation Month. And with just a few days left in the month of October, I want to remind you we have a special resource that would be a great gift for you to give to your pastor or to an elder. We've made every message in this series, plus 6 additional volumes of the Pastor Study, available on a USB drive for just $5. You can order a copy or 2 today at truthforlife.org/store. We love being able to offer resources like this USB drive at such a low cost, but it's only possible because listeners like you have covered the financial needs of this ministry. And when you help with a donation today, we want to say thank you by sending you a brand new book called Counsel for Couples. This is a comprehensive guide for pastors or small group leaders or for anyone involved in marriage ministry. This book will help you plan your counseling sessions, will help you address common problems faced by married couples today, and will give you guidance for how to structure follow-up. The author is Jonathan Holmes. He's a seasoned marriage counselor, and he draws from years of experience in compiling this book, which is all firmly rooted in Scripture. Request your copy of Counsel for Couples when you donate today, online at truthforlife.org/donate, or call 888-588-7884. That's 888-588-7884. By the way, in the summer of 2020, Alistair will be teaching the Bible on board a cruise ship traveling to Alaska, and you're invited to come along. During this remarkable 7-day journey, you'll study the Scriptures, share in fellowship with others, enjoy front-row seats to God's magnificent creation. Learn how you can secure your ticket when you call 855-565-5519. Or you can go online to deeperfaithcruise.com. I'm Bob Lepine, inviting you to join us Tuesday for the conclusion of the message titled Evangelistic Preaching. The Bible teaching of Alistair Begg is furnished by Truth for Life, where the learning is for living.